All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to yet another episode of Black Mental Health Matters. I'm your host for today. My name is Trinity Thompson. And since the last time that I've been a host, I've actually changed career names. I am now a case manager for community health resources. So I'm super excited about that. I started a new position last month. And today we are going to be discussing eating disorders, chronic dieting, binging, and body image within the Black community. And I'm very, very honored to present our guest for today, Brianne Brathwaite. And I will just let her introduce herself. So, Ms. Brianne, I will pass off to you.
Thank you, Trinity. Hello, everyone. My name is Brianne Brathwaite. Pronouns are she, her. I am a registered dietitian that focuses on eating disorders and disordered eating. I own a LLC, a private practice. It's called Eat for Success. And there we help all of our clients, foster new relationships with food, heal their relationships with food. I'm also additionally a certified authenticity coach, and I also do work with that, helping people find their most authentic selves and really living in that. And I'm so grateful and excited to be here and just so excited for this conversation, as all of the topics are so important. And I don't think that they've gotten as much light as they needed to. So I'm happy to be a resource, and I'm happy to be here, and I'm just really grateful in general.
That is amazing. So how did you get started within the whole dietitian and nutrition? How did you get started within this field?
Yes. So in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I had taken a forensic science course, and I was like, this is it. This is what I'm doing. No one can tell me any different. I'm going to go and be a forensic scientist. And then I think it was my first class in my university, and they were like, this is a cadaver. And I was like, and this is me getting up, walking out, going to the registrar's office and saying, hold up, I didn't sign up for that. We need to find a new moment for life. And so I ultimately, my mom was like, if you don't know what to do, you can figure it out, go back, take a leave of absence, go to community college and take all these courses. So during my time in community college, I really started to think about nutrition, and it was like, oh my goodness, how did I not see this before? Food is just one of my favorite things, and the ability to study it and to see how it interacts with our lives is so important and impactful. So then after that, it was a straight career shot to becoming a dietitian. And when I was sitting in my classes, I realized there were not many people that looked like me. Teachers didn't look like me. When I was going through my dietetic internship and going through the process, I remember one of the first times ever seeing another Black dietitian was in a hospital in the Bronx. And it had dawned on me that I had met over thousands of professionals in my entire time of being. And so when I came into the field, I realized that Black dietitians were not really running around freely. We're about 3% of the population of dietetics. And then the percentage that works with eating disorders is even smaller. So that kind of like set the tone of, okay, so this is more than just, my job. Like I am a person who is Black in dietetics, and that's important too.
Okay. And I think that's like super interesting because of the lack of representation, especially within something so important. Like, in order for any living species to survive, there needs to be some source of like fuel. And for human beings, it's food and water, but like food. And with our community, I think every ethnicity, every culture has like their significance of like food that they place significance like with food. But I know specifically in the Black community, we have soul food, or within the African American community, but I'll generalize it and expand it out to the Black community as a whole. As far as like different areas of the diaspora, a lot of the things that we tend to connect with one another is food. So I actually think that was like a perfect segue into the history of food within the Black community. So if you don't know, soul food is very prominent for all of our viewers. Soul food is very prominent within our Black community. Food has been a way for us to bond. It's been a point. It's been a staple for Black family members, Black households to come together, Black communities, neighbors come together, and we celebrate. We grieve with food. We celebrate with food. Pretty much all of our I want to say our big like milestones and like our celebrations and things like that. One of our biggest traditional customs is revolves around food and meals and cuisine. So for our viewers that don't know too much about the history of soul food and the history like of the importance of food in our community, I just wanted to quickly hit on the points of going back to the slavery era. Food rations were typically given out on Saturdays by slave masters, and the white people were given to Black people on Saturdays. And historically, Sundays were the days that were given to slaves as the day off. That was the day of rest. And that was typically the day that people, went to church. They bonded together. They bonded with their families because that was the only time of week that they were able to do so. And they were also able to cook foods. So the foods that were given to us were lard, scraps of like animal carcasses that were not eaten by the white people and by the slave masters and their families. So that could have been like parts of the pig, parts of the chicken that were discarded, that weren't seen as edible, that were given to us, greens, cornmeal. And I feel like, or not I feel like, but I know that that's what encompasses a lot of our cuisine today, such as cornbread, collard greens, ham, fried chicken, black eyed peas. Things that weren't seen as edible to slave masters were given to us, and that's what we use, and that's what we bonded over for generations to come. Recipes have been passed down, and now in the present day, that is a bonding moment between family members, and like I said, neighborhoods and communities as a whole. Where we spend time in the kitchen together, learning together from mother to daughter, mother to son, son or father to son, father to daughter, however, the case is. It's been a moment of not just eating and bonding as far as eating, but also cooking and the significance of making that meal right. So what do you like, has that happened like in your family, that traditional kind of Sunday meal, getting together for holidays and things like that?
Yeah, so the Black community is such a large diaspora.
Mm,
My family is from the Caribbean. They're from
okay.
Barbados, and I was adopted, but my birth family is from the US, from America. So I see how they come together in similarities, and I see the ways that they might, navigate in different ways. Um, And I think that 100% a lot of what you were talking about, like how Sunday becomes that day of rejoicement, that day of joy, that day of sitting with the family, making sure that the community's good, you know? And I see how that still does to this day, like even on an island that like such as Barbados, Sundays are a really important day for just that community. And so I absolutely have grown up with that sense of community, whether it's church, right? If that's the sense of community, um, whether it's having everybody over for family dinner, family meal, or even just like hanging out, you know, like the whole family's hanging out, no one has work, there's a point in time when everyone's connecting. So I definitely do experience that.
Yeah, I definitely think it's important with, not just African, because when we talk about Black culture, it's really important to know that there are so many subcultures underneath that. Like African American culture is not the same, obviously, as Caribbean culture. Caribbean cultures differ with one another, whether you're from Barbados, Bahamas, Jamaica, all of the islands, they each have their own individual culture. So of course it's not fair to, like generalize all of them, but within Black culture in general, food is very important. That's safe to say across all of the subcultures underneath that term, Black culture. So like you said, definitely it became a moment to rejoice, to celebrate, to bond with our neighbors, our family, and that has just spread across cookouts in the summertime with family reunions, funerals. The first thing people want to do is get together and what are we eating and making sure that everybody's fed. So I think that it's very important to say that food is a symbol of love. Food is a symbol of respect. Food is a symbol of family. And I think that it's so important it was important for me to recognize the history and the significance of food before we get further into our conversation, because as we begin to like really dissect the areas of like chronic dieting or food disorder, or I'm sorry, eating disorders around body image, we first, and I want all of the viewers to know the significance of food and just the level of the standard that we hold food to within the Black community, because it is, like I said, a symbol of love and respect and rejoice and togetherness in community. So I think that it is time to move on to our first topic, which is our food and health risk within the Black community. So we know that the food that typically we eat is not the healthiest. A lot of the soul food within the African American community is cooked in various sources of fat, such as oil, so any type of like oil, vegetable oil, canola oil, peanut oil, things like that aren't typically the healthiest. And historically, it was cooked in lard. There's shortening, things that just aren't healthy. So they do tend to pose and put us at a higher risk of certain chronic disorders, which I think you wanted to talk about. So since you are the expert, I will pass this off to you. What are some disorders that you typically see within the Black community that are a little bit more prominent?
Yeah, so I wanted to touch on a couple things that I heard, and I think it is important. So just a little bit back on the historical significance. When I was listening to you, I was hearing this theme of a lack of food diversity, right? We were given what we had. Like we didn't get to go and intuitively choose what we wanted in
Right.
forest, in garden. We were given, this is what you got, this is what you got to use.
Yep, and make the most of it.
Make the most of it. And also, like enslaved people weren't just like, obviously they weren't hanging out, they were like doing really hard laborious jobs. And so, for slave owners, it must have crossed their mind at one point, yeah, we need to give them food, but we need to give them food that gives them the ability to work. So they're not passing out, so we don't have to deal with that. We need to make sure that they are able to do this really structured, hard, unfair, unethical labor. And if we are going to give them things, we're going to give them scraps. We're going to also give them scraps that are going to be sustainable to some extent. And not out of kindness, but
Right.
out of necessity. So then when we move on to, and this is just something that I'll probably say, I don't really believe in healthy food versus unhealthy food. I like to take the morality out of food, because I think when we get there, we start to internalize, right? Like if I eat a bad food, does that make me bad? If I eat
Mm,
healthy food, does that make me good?
mm-hmm.
And what if a bad food is that only connection, that bad food is an only connection to, you know, all of the things that my family and I have been going through in the connection, the community, and all of that, right? So I like to take away those titles and I like to kind of replace them with all foods fit. I think in terms of the health risk in our community, which are a big deal, they're undeniable, right? I think it's important to know that the Black community is predisposed, right? Which means they have a higher incidence, probably most likely genetically, right? For high cholesterol, high blood pressure, type 2
Mm-hmm.
diabetes, heart disease. And then on top of that, I started to look into, well, what are some of the other things? Like, yes, food does, have a big role to play, but what are some of the other things that are playing a role? And through my research, I discovered stress. And when I sat down and I was like, well, do Black people go through stress? Then I started laughing at myself because that's a silly question. We go through what? We go through weight stigma, we go through racism, we go through sexism, we go through all of these really highly stressful environments where we have to continue to be these forces of nature to even get through it, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
if we're carrying, you know, a load of 20-pound boxes, there's someone every day who just keeps adding like 10 pounds, like every day,
Right.
10 pounds. Oh, that's hard for you here. Have 10 more pounds. Um, and so it's it's interesting because now our bodies are predisposed. We're exposed to all of this stress. And then, much like that historical significance that we talked about, we also have this large food insecurity place that we're living in. So we don't have food diversity. Some people don't have the reality to wake up and say, oh, you know what I want to do? Today I'm going to drive in my car and go to Whole Foods and I'm going to buy this and this. And then later on, I'm going to come home and I'm going to cook this really good meal for my family. It might take me 2 to 3 hours, but oh, actually, I can use my Instapot and that will shorten it to 30 minutes. Like some people don't have that reality.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really is, we're still kind of living in that system where it's like we have to work to live and we have to eat things to work to live.
Mm-hmm.
And that never was dismantled. We were never taught in the beginning to be intuitive once we arrived, once the slave owners stuck their claims on what was going to happen. And so that also flows through the channels of like cyclic understanding and tradition and how we interact with our food.
Exactly. I think so. You brought up two really good points that I wanted to also comment on. So the first being that the food insecurity thing. I think that was like super important because I went to Spelman College. That's in Atlanta, and it's in the middle of the West End neighborhood. And we, in one of my classes, we had talked about food insecurity being an issue in the West End Atlanta because we go to the grocery stores, the local grocery stores, and we see that there's not a lot of fresh produce out. There's produce, but it's about maybe a day or two before it's no longer good. And then when you travel out to different areas of Atlanta, and this also occurs in any major city, when you travel out to other parts of the city and you see the more Whole Foods and the Jamba Juices and like a lot of smoothie shops and Eat Green and things like that and like local farmers markets, and the price is so much higher. And like you said, not everybody has the luxury or the ability to be able to say, I'm going to go get in my car and then I'm going to go to Whole Foods today and spend $200 on maybe a week's worth of groceries or maybe 2 weeks worth of groceries. They don't have that luxury. So it's a choice between getting on the bus, spending $1 or however much the bus tickets are, spending that small amount of change to get on the bus and go to the local Walmart where the produce section isn't that big and there's more foods that they're cheaper, but they're not the best for our health. And I know you were saying that you don't like to think of food as what's good versus what's bad, but in terms of reality, foods that are more accessible, that are not the best for our health, especially because we are predisposed, versus being able to get into your car that runs on gas to go further out to a place that's not as easily accessible for certain members of our community that live in lower socioeconomic status neighborhoods. They don't have that luxury, so it's like they are forced to. It kind of plays into that whole generational curse, generational trauma of doing the most with what you were given because that's your only option, honestly. And the other thing that I wanted to talk about that you had touched on was like stress. And I had seen that a lot in my research was when I was preparing for this conversation was that racism and discrimination does play a huge role in our food choices. And you would never think to connect the two. But it's like food is a thing that we've always learned that nourishes us. Like it feels good to us. So you eat something that makes you feel good. And I will be the first to admit, when I'm stressed, when I'm depressed, or I'm having a bad day, I'm just like, dang, I could really go for a nice like order of fries. I could go for like a good plate of like collard greens and some chicken and some cornbread, something that just like feels good to me, that's nourishing my soul. But when we are out in the real world and us like people of color, like when we're facing like discrimination and racism and things like that, it it does feel good to go back to our home and rejoice within our own people and within our own four walls over a nice plate of food. So I thank you for actually bringing that up because that I feel like that is such a underlooked, actually something that like we probably would have never thought of if we didn't bring it up. Such like a topic and like a correlation between stress and eating.
Yeah, and I thank you for like I'm gonna say it on this podcast. I love how your brain works. And I also think, when we're talking about the food, right? I think we can say that maybe it's not as nutrient dense. But the
Mm-hmm.
reason why I say like all food fits is because like in those situations, like I never want anyone to feel ashamed of how they're going to provide energy for themselves and for their family. And if
Right.
it is at that capacity, and that's the day-to-day life, I think that when we start to feel ashamed, we start to feel like bad parents, we start to feel like unhealthy people, we start to take on all of these already stressful narratives that we already have a stressful narrative, you know?
Right.
And so it's not so much to say that like the food that we eat never impacts how we are. I just think that there are people of privilege who have the ability to choose. They have the ability of choice. They have the ability of access. And so their relationship with soul food or their relationship with comfort food looks different
Mm-hmm.
because they can find other things that are sources of comfort. They can afford therapy. They can afford, that yoga and membership for like $300 a month. Like they can
Mm-hmm.
afford all of these different things that take the stress off of the mental and the emotional capacity of the human being. And so I want everyone to know that there's like that demonization of like black food. Like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, like fried chicken, how could you do that? Right? And it's like, no, it's fried chicken. Like you can have fried chicken.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes it continues to weigh us down in our view of what balance looks like and how that can be obtained. And of course, as we said before, so yeah, that all goes into what eating disorders look like and when they pop up, how they wreak havoc in our lives.
Right, right. I think especially when we have like our daily checkup, or I'm sorry, not daily, yearly checkups, like when we go to the doctor. And that's granted if we do have if members in our community have the access and the privilege to be able to go see their primary care physician, to be able to go and like get their yearly checkups and see how their health is. I think that a lot of I think it, regardless of like the color of the doctor, I think it still relies heavily on the history of the medical system and our healthcare system and numbers that have been, made up based off of white people or people of certain privilege as far as like BMIs and weights and things like that. I feel like it's almost unfair to compare people because we are all kind of built differently and based off of our history. And if anybody knows anything about like the history of evolution with Black people, with anybody, any race or anything like that, we kind of we've evolved to be able to kind of like have a higher endurance of like our soul foods, because that's the only thing that we've been, not the only thing we've been eating, but that has consisted of our diet and the things that we've been taking in for years now. So we kind of evolved this way. I don't think it would be fair for somebody like me, a little bit like on the heavier side, like curvy and stuff like that, certain body images, to be reduced down to a number on a scale, reduced down to a BMI ratio, because who is the ratio based off of?
Preach. Sorry.
It doesn't make sense to me.
Preach. Yes. Yes. And I, as a dietitian, I completely, totally agree with what you just said. The role of racism in Black bodies is, why would we think it just stops at food? Why would we think it just stops at the skin color? You
Right.
know, it doesn't. And you're completely right. The BMI, it's for a second. BMI. I was like, wait, what does that mean? It's basically your index of your weight. And it was created because it was supposed to show obesity over a span of a population. And the population that it was created for was actually white European men. So when we really think about how that is going to play into where we are now, it's just like, we know that, let's just talk about men and women. Very big differences, biologically speaking. And then also, we're going to take it one step further and we're going to put it into a different cultural, racial context. And so now we're expected to meet these numbers of health because someone said so.
Right.
Not because there was extensive testing done on what that would look like. Like our BMI or our body mass index, it really wasn't meant to tell you if you were healthy.
Mm-hmm.
That wasn't the goal of it.
But somehow now doctors have reduced, they have their charts in the offices, they've reduced us to that number. Like if you fall within this range, you're at a perfect normal weight, everything's good. If you fall within the yellow, within the red, you're morbidly obese, you need to change your diet, this, that, and the third. And like, it's like to a certain level, I do agree. There could be better things that you could do for your diet, but why am I being compared to this number that was based off of white European men?
Yeah. And that's part of that disparity in healthcare, health isn't equal, right? And unfortunately, because of this, the insurance companies for a very long time adapted it, right? So that's like one of the gold standards. Actually, interestingly enough, the APA, which is an organization that's very close with like health and medical sciences, just talked about ways that BMI should not be focused on. So as we talk about this here, like, it also is a reality, right? Like these aren't things that are made up, but as many big systems are, right? Like changing the BMI would have to change the course of how people have been doing things with insurance companies for years, right? And like, who's going to be doing that, right? And it all fits back to this understanding of, we need to change. We need to change. We need to do better. We need to start including other people in these conversations. Why? Because, a Black person with a BMI that's fitting white standards doesn't also equate to health. If you're starving, if your body's not getting the nutrients it needs for you to, if you're going through dieting cycles, if you have poor body image, poor nutrition understanding, all to be in this place of, this BMI that's supposedly supposed to fit you, like, is that really truly health? No. So
like if you're hungry, you're not feeling good, like you're always tired, you have no energy, but you fit within the BMI range. How could you how it doesn't equate, like it doesn't make sense. So like you said, like there definitely has to be changes, which it would require a lot of extensive research on the averages of Black people. And then, like I said before, there's so many different types of Black people. So it's like we can't all fit to this one universal standard, this one worldwide standard. If it's based off of one specific group of people, we would need our own numbers and ranges, and that would require a lot of research to be able to see where we would lie within a certain ratio or a certain number on a scale in order to be considered healthy.
And I also think, like, I think about that and I think about maybe that system changes. Maybe there are no numbers, and maybe it looks like, okay, what are the social determinants of health that you have access to? Do you have economic stability? Do you have educational access? Do you have healthcare access? Do you have neighborhood and environmental, security? Do you have a social community that's loving and caring and supportive? And then, are you having enough to eat every day? Are you hydrating enough every day? Are you engaging in some mindful movement? Maybe those should be more of the understanding of, like, whether or not a person is having a healthy lifestyle rather than a number, right? Because that number so often invalidates Black people in so many ways. I think it might be better to think about this in this way, which is like health at every size, meaning in your body, you can be healthy, and that your body is not to blame or is not a direct receipt to whether or not you're healthy. And I think that makes sense, right? Like, there are many people who are in this thin ideal, right? But they could have tons of health issues. They could have cancer, they could have all these different things. And the fact that their body is a certain shape or size doesn't determine whether or not that makes it so.
Yeah, I think especially with those, I think you had touched on it a little bit a little while ago. Certain disorders, chronic illnesses within Black communities that people are just genetically predisposed to. Doesn't have anything, like, you could be the healthiest, you still might develop type 2 diabetes, you still might develop high blood pressure, you still might develop cancer, because it's just it's genetic, and there's a chance that you will develop it, or there's a chance that you may not. So I think that we shouldn't always reduce those types of disorders. I think, yes, of course, like, your food and your diet will make an impact, but nobody should ever feel bad or be made to be felt bad by society based off of what you eat, because of you might not be able to control that person's environment as far as the things that they have access to. Like how you said before, also, people might have the luxury to get in their car, go to their therapist, and have all these different coping mechanisms, when maybe within the four walls of my house, I feel the most safest. I feel it's good for me to cope by making a meal that feels good to me. So I think that it's definitely important, everything that you said. So I just wanted to say that was great. That was gold. Especially learning from a dietitian, everybody. She's a dietitian. She's telling you this is not just made up.
It's not. And something I found really, really jarring was, I was going through, dietitians, we do a lot of research. A lot of what we do is evidence-based. And I was going through a 2015 study by Psychology Sciences that found that people who are reported to experience, like, this weight discrimination actually had a 60% increased risk of dying independent of BMI and body size. And that to me was just, like, mind-boggling. So, like, the effect of the weight stigma, the racism, the sexism, right? That discrimination piece actually is more unhealthy for the body than the weight itself.
Right. Very, very good stuff. Very important. But I think it's definitely time to move into eating disorders within the Black community. And I'm actually really interested in hearing the things that you see personally, like as a dietitian within your own profession, and also discussing some of the things that I found. So before you start, I wanted to just bring up some things that I had seen within my research, because again, like I said, I was not too knowledgeable about the topic beforehand. gained a little bit of information, and I definitely want to see like where it goes and what kind of conversations this opens up. I didn't even really know if eating disorders really existed within the Black community. I know nobody is, just like not subjected or susceptible to developing an eating disorder. But I know that with the relationship of that we have like historically with food, I wondered how it would affect us, especially living in 2023, where body image and diet and physical wellness and mental wellness is such a big thing. It's more popular now than it was, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. So I actually did find that two of the most prominent eating disorders within the Black community were binge eating and bulimia. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so binge eating is an eating disorder, which is generally characterized by eating large amounts of food at once and not feeling the power to stop. Um, and it normally follows, some sort of like stressful experience. And there's that. And then you said also bulimia, which is like, it's binge eating. So it could be eating a lot of food at once, not
Mhm.
feeling able to stop, and then purging. And purging can be, excessive exercise, misusing of laxatives, or self-induced vomiting.
Mhm.
And so those are the two most common. However, I will say that there are some other eating disorders that do affect the Black community, such as anorexia, which
Mhm.
is a form of restricting. And restricting means starving oneself, having a certain amount of calories that would not be what the body would need to use. And you can have anorexia coincide with other purging behaviors. And then sometimes it can just stand alone as just undernourishing your body intentionally, with no other behaviors. And so those are the top eating disorders. There's also another one. It's called ARFID, and that is not so much, sometimes it can be focused, but not so much focused on weight, but more so focused on textures and sensory aversions to food. And typically you see this at a very, very young age, independent of understanding of food at that time.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to put it out there that there is a spectrum of eating disorders, but the two most studied and the two most prevalent as we know today are the binge eating disorder and the bulimia for the Black community.
Okay. So there was also a quote that I seen while I was doing my research from Rachel Good. She's an assistant researcher at the University of North Carolina Nutrition Research Institute. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about with the food insecurity and us kind of making something out of nothing, where she says you have to think about what food means in Black American communities historically. We had scraps and we had to make mosaics out of nothing. As Black Americans, we don't want to waste food. We value being able to give large portions. We value being able to eat more than enough. So that was in relation to when I was looking at a study done on binge eating disorder. And I feel like that's also true because I feel like just at some point within our lives, we've all had like that one mom, that one aunt, grandmother, where it's like, you better eat everything off that plate. Don't leave anything to waste, because we do at some points like within our life or within like history, we know what it was like to not know where like our next meal was coming from because we were primarily given scraps. So I feel like what she was saying, as far as being able to provide large portions and not letting anything go to waste, it's not like it was like, I don't know. I feel like I'm having a hard time explaining this, but it's like it almost was embedded in us to not waste food. And then that kind of turned or kind of plays its role in the development of binge eating, because we are told, to make sure you clean that plate. And it's not so that we are focused on like eating every single thing, but it's more so like we don't know. There might be a time where we don't know where our next meal is coming from because of that touches on the food insecurity. So it's like you better eat while you can. And I feel like that might have like turned embedded into like a psychological process of I need to eat all of this food. Like I have to eat all this food, and I'm unable to stop because I don't know where my next meal is coming from.
Yeah, so a couple things came up for me
Mm,
in what you said, and I think one of the things was, you know, when you were saying like that scarcity. So I call it the scarcity mindset. The
mhm,
scarcity mindset, meaning this might not always be here, so I have to have it now, which can be a factor that goes into the binge eating component.
mhm,
Like knowing what it feels like to have a restrictive, you know, meal plan or diet based on different situations that aren't exactly 100% in your control and not wanting to be in that position again. I also think that it can be emotional. It can be an emotional response to trauma. It can be emotional response to things that are happening in your life. And so, there are so many ways that that can come about, but I do think that there is a large amount of scarcity mindset within our community because
mhm.
of what we went through. And I didn't say this in the beginning, but I have 2 degrees. One is in nutrition and dietetics, and the other one's in nutrition and genomics, which is the study of the genome. And that goes back into like the genetically encoded trauma, right? And how
Mhm.
that comes into things. And when we think about, especially I think about my Caribbean family, they did all this work to get here. And now they're like, you better eat. Like,
Right, because it's like there was a time where there was nothing on the
where there
table.
was nothing. And I think that builds that scarcity mindset. So binge eating is one of those things where it's like, sometimes it gets mixed up with like overeating. And those are two different things. But I think, either way, that scarcity mindset does play a huge part in some of the binge eating cases that I have personally treated and seen. And that is really one of the hurdles. And I think when we think about eating disorders, it's not all just about the food. And many of the times it's not about the food. It's about the psychological backing and
Mhm.
why the food is the vehicle that we're driving in and the things that we do with it.
Yeah, and I definitely one thing that you had said was about like or like the trauma, the emotional eating as far as like trauma. And I think that especially with people that might have had like a lifestyle change, like at one point, like one time they remember there was nothing on the table and now they are in a better position to be able to eat whenever they remember. I feel like it kind of coincides with them remembering a time where there was nothing to eat, so they feel like they feel the need to have to make up for those times by making sure that nothing goes to waste. And even though their next meal is kind of a sure thing that it is coming, it's a psychological thing. Like at this point, like it's not a matter of, okay, I don't need to eat this because I know there's still more food in the fridge. It's, I am still in a place where there's not food in the fridge. I can't see it. It's not in front of me, so it's not there. What is in front of me is this plate right here, and I'm unable to stop because I don't know where my next meal. My mind remembers when there wasn't a meal, the next meal to come along. So I feel like, especially so with that mixed in with the history and the significance of our food, I feel like it definitely is. It's harder to. I feel like binge eating is definitely a very understandable thing for the Black community. Like it does kind of make sense because we know that there are um reoccurring themes of food insecurity and food scarcity within certain neighborhoods and
Mhm.
within families and households where people do feel the need to have to continue to overeating because they do remember a time where the food was not there. um so for bulimia, I understand. I definitely understand binge eating. Bulimia with the feeling to purge after eating in excessive amounts. Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think that bulimia is also a prevalent disorder within the Black community?
Well, I think when we talk about binge eating, we're talking about that uncontrollable eating, not being able to stop until a level of fullness that is just so uncomfortable and so
Mhm,
unbearable. And so then, what sometimes the body itself um, will be like, okay, like this is too much. And it could be that the vomiting is induced, by an actual guttural reaction. Um,
mhm,
or it could be like sitting in that discomfort, right, is
mhm,
really unbearable. And then that purging is like a release, right? And the feeling of the purge is a release of the very like uncontrollable feeling of a binge. And I'm doing this very like, basic level
Mhm.
description, but you know, sometimes what will happen is after a binge there's shame. And one of the ways to deal with that shame is to have the thought process of, well, I'm getting rid of this.
Mhm.
And sometimes that can look like, oh, I ate this and now I have to work it out in the gym. Or I've done this and now I have to self-induce vomiting to um free myself of the shame and all of the different things. And I think, for everyone it's so different. I think in this is the realm where like mental health comes in and really
Mhm.
like tries to like take apart the moments and really see what the mechanism is behind the purging and the type
Yeah.
of purging that's used. But I do think that, when we do think about like that very like just uncomfortable just place, it's very important to know that that comes from that space of, what do I do now? I'm uncomfortable. What do I do now? And sometimes I've heard clients tell me, hey, a purge makes me feel better about that action. But I think it's different for everybody.
Mhm. So you can definitely let me know if I'm wrong because you are the professional here. But I'm going kind of based off of like what I'm assuming as far as specifically bulimia. And I feel like it may have a tie to body image. I think that there's a lot of pressure around having this certain image, especially within the Black community, because you do see it a lot today in 2023 and like more recent years, as far as developing like the perfect body image and the way that you present yourself out in the world and like what's attractive versus what's not attractive. So I feel like it might I feel like I could see a correlation between binge eating, coming from a place where there is food scarcity, and then feeling the need to purge because you do want to still be able to seem conventionally attractive, like out into society, and being able to control your body image. You still want to be able to eat what you want, but you still also want that figure that everybody is glamorizing and sexualizing. So, and like I said, you can let me know if I'm wrong, but I could assume, there would be some sort of relationship there.
Yeah, no, there definitely is a sort of relationship there, right? Like
Mhm.
we all know that like when we look at what's happening, it's like the food that we eat and the way that we eat, like our brains will connect that to the next step, which is, what is this doing to my body? Right. And then, like maybe it is like, because I am engaging in this binging, like I do need to punish myself and I do need to do this thing so that I can look a certain way. And that's definitely a connection that's being made. As I said, there are so many ways to look at this.
Mhm.
Like so many at so many points that like,
Yes, there are.
everybody's reason for their behaviors and what they and how they interact with their eating disorder is so individualized. So I don't have like
Mhm.
a like structured answer, but I think what we're coming to here is just like there are so many ways, and that yes, all of this relates back to body image. And whether it's, you know, like you said, like I want to eat what I want to eat and I want to do that, and then I want to make sure that I look a certain way, and to do that, that is what I'm going to do. Or
Mhm.
if it's just like, I'm having these moments and it's affecting my body biologically because I am changing the pattern of how I'm eating and these things are happening. So, and then there's also more psychological things that filter in. So yeah, I think it's definitely um a link. And I think that, also like in the eating disorder world, there is the nutrition world, and there's also that works really closely in hand with like the therapeutic and psychology world as well.
Yeah. And definitely, like you said, there are a lot of factors that could impact, the development or just kind of like the overall course of an eating disorder, like within somebody, within the Black community. It could be like, I feel like I can see a lot of like intersectionality. It could be like generational trauma and the feeling of like needing control like over your own body. It could be generational trauma and food insecurity. It could be insecurity and the need to control yourself. Like, it's just, there's so many things that could like overlap into one. So like you said, I could definitely also see and understand where it could be there's not one specific answer to explain why somebody is the way they are within the realm of eating disorders and control eating and binging. So I feel like this is also a good segue into body image within the Black community, which we also know is very prominent. So I do want to talk about in society and today, we are like heavily influenced by media. I feel like that's kind of like the biggest influence right now as far as like what sets the trend for body image. And throughout history, a certain body image or a certain body type has become trendy. So it's all about like what's trending now. So it's gone from like having a petite figure to being like tall and petite. You can be tall and shapely. You can be overweight, and that would be beautiful. You can be, but I feel like what's trending today is kind of like that BBL image, the curvy hourglass figure, the large bottom, the large breast, and height doesn't really like have anything to do with it. I feel like everybody's a lot more accepting for height. So for me personally, I'm 5'9", so I'm tall for a girl. And when I was in high school, I used to suffer a lot, like with my self-esteem, because I was tall and I was very like slender. I was very skinny, and I didn't really start putting on weight until I got to college. But within like the last like I was in high school maybe like 6 years ago. So between that time and now, I feel like the more trendy body image is kind of like that hourglass figure. And so what do you see like when you have like clients coming into you with like eating disorders? Like, do they talk about like this pressure to conform to like what societal beauty standards are?
Yeah, of course. And I think you were talking about media, and what I like to say that is diet culture, right? We're all in this place of diet culture, and then we have bodies that are sexualized more than other bodies. We have bodies that are deemed to be more healthy than other bodies. And when I think about Black bodies, I think it's really important to kind of go a little bit back to that history. So, the fear of the Black body is a fear of a larger set body, and it was founded in anti-Blackness. So if we go all the way back prior to the slave trade, there was the Renaissance painters, and they were Europeans, and they depicted the rich and wealthy with these shapely, larger bodies, and they were sitting on like a chair all stretched out. Someone was feeding them grapes, and they were like, we've got it. We got enough money for food. We have the best of the best. And then as soon as they realized when they were, when slaves were being taken, the enslaved people were being taken on the boats for months, like there were times where enslaved people were depicted as these like very scrawny, like frail, almost like masticated human beings. And it wasn't true to an extent, right? Because then all of a sudden they started being painted as these very like large, boisterous, kind of like exaggerations of like, a butt or boobs or curves. And race scientists at the time started to link that as like gluttony and stupidity, and it was just like all of a sudden those painters that were celebrating a well-nourished body weren't painting like that anymore.
Exactly.
Right? And there was this push for the wealthy to be this very thin set body. And so that began that like if you weren't thin, right, then you weren't in. Or if you weren't thin, you weren't healthy. And that was like at the point where that was yet another pull of that like anti-Blackness. How do we separate us from them? And that's kind of where it landed. And now, as we go through time, there's become this body, the Black body has been sexualized. So in a way where it's like, you're expected as a Black person to have a certain type of body, which is what you're talking about. That skinny waist, that big butt, those big boobs, that kind of thing. And that is now been fueled by media, by diet culture, by what is expected of Black bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have like the two things coming at us. You got to be thin, but if you're not going to be thin, then you got to be this BBL looking,
right, like this curvy, like, shape. And then you have the people that are going through, and I've actually seen it myself, people that are having like, you know, the lipo surgeries, the BBL surgeries and things like that. And then they are selling workout plans as soon as their body heals. So it's like, so what do you want? You want me to get the surgery because I know you got surgery? Or do you want me to like follow your workout plan that you don't even adhere to? It's almost become like unrealistic in a sense, like the way that they sell it. So it's like if you don't have that kind of like that body shape naturally, it's like people are overdoing it to achieve that body shape. They're either spending a whole lot of money to get the surgeries, or they're spending a lot of time and probably money on like the, like you said, like trying to conform to this diet culture and this diet standard as like you got to eat all this protein, like if you want to build the muscle, you know, which in a sense is true, but it's like, and or again, it all goes back to conforming to society standards of like what's in or what's the trend now.
Yeah.
So,
and I think you said a lot of really amazing things just now. I want to point one of them out. You said there's a person who's going to go and get the surgery, and then they're going to sell you a meal plan. They're going to sell you a plan that's supposed to make you look like them, when that's not what they did to look like them. Like,
right.
and then it like reinforces this thought process that if I eat exactly what this person eats, then I will look like them, which is like, as a dietitian, I will tell you, completely untrue. Completely untrue. We're all different. Our bodies have different ways of being. Metabolism is a factor. You eating something that somebody else is eating is not going to make you look like them. I can say that point blank, out, period. And it's proven, right? Because I'm sure there are people who try this and then they're doing it for maybe a couple weeks, couple months. They're not seeing results. And then the thought process is like, there's something wrong with me. I'm not doing this right. I'm a failure because I'm unable to look like what I was told I would look like.
Exactly.
Right. And then what does that do to a person? It starts to really strain their reality with their food and with their body. And it makes them feel small and really destroys self-confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that I've definitely I've experienced that myself, you know, just feeling like, you know, oh, like I want to lose the weight. Like if I do this, if I follow like, and I, you know, feel like TikTok is like our biggest killer right now because like you see like these like girls on TikTok, like, oh my God, like this actually worked. And I'm not going to lie, like I've fallen victim to that. Like, okay, well, she got this supplement. She's done this. She's put liquid chlorophyll in her water and like the these vitamins and supplements. Like if I do this, then like, you know, maybe one day like, oh, look like that. And it's just like at the end of the day, I'm like, I'm hungry. Like I'm gonna go eat what I want to eat because like I can't do this. But I also do appreciate that, like, you know, on the other end, within like this particular day and age, we do have people that are a lot more welcoming and more comfortable, and they embrace their bodies, their natural bodies, whether they're petite, they're small, they're tall, they're overweight, if they're tall and petite, if they're short and overweight, like it doesn't matter. I really appreciate that everybody, or more people, I should say, more people are finding the beauty within themselves and are not becoming as easily influenced. But it is also still dangerous because we are in an age that where we do have more influential people than ever. Like people are literally becoming like, or calling themselves, their professional titles are social media influencers. And with us having so many young users on every platform like YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, things like that, these young impressionable minds are like, well, if I want to look like that, especially in the age of like adolescence where it's like their body image and their self-esteem is everything. Like that's number one. How do I fit into a group? When you have these young impressionable minds that all they want to do is fit in, because that is very normal. It's psychologically, like I think it's Eric Erickson. That's his biggest thing at that adolescence and like young adult age. Everybody just wants to fit in somewhere. So it's like when you're exposing these impressionable young people to different videos and things like that, and accessing all this information at once is literally inundating their minds as far as like, this is what I have to do to look like this, and that's what I'm going to do. So I feel like it's unhealthy in a way where they're not going to be at that age where it's like, I feel comfortable within myself. There's nothing that I need to change. So I don't know. It's like, you can see like it can go either way.
Yeah, and I think when we say things like overweight, like especially like in this context, like, you know, as I said, like they're like when we think about like health at every size, is someone really ever overweight? Like,
Right,
you know what I
right,
mean? Like that might just be their body. And maybe we ask them, like, what do you consider? What do you prefer? Do you prefer a larger body, or do you just prefer us not to even talk about it at all? Right? Like that's not like sometimes I will go to like a reunion and I'll hear people say things like, "Oh my goodness, Maggie, did you do this? What about your weight? Da 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 da." And I'm like, Maggie didn't ask for that. Like I thought we were here for
that's true.
Paul, and Paul and Jessica are getting married next week. Why are we talking about Maggie and what
Right.
Maggie's body looks like? And it's just like one of those things where it's like maybe and you kind of said this like in the past. It's just like there's so many different places, and on one side there are spaces and communities for people to feel welcome as they are, and then there still is that like ever growing diet culture that's like, no, you need to look like this or you need to look like this, otherwise you can't join the club. And unfortunately a lot of society is there. So you mentioned something about younger children, and the onset age for eating disorders is somewhere around like 8 to 10 years old. So it's really important that we also think about like the messages that are being sent, you know, especially with TikTok. Like you can scroll all day and like maybe you remember two or three things the second you log off, but during the week your brain is still processing the things that you saw, and they start to come up in whatever ways they're going to come up. And yeah, I think it is a dangerous place, you know, with all of the social media influencers. And what are they motivated by? They're not motivated by helping you be your best self. They're not motivated by really making a change in someone's life, right? They're motivated by money, and they're seeing this as an opportunity. You know, that meal plan that they don't have any schooling to make, that meal plan is also a cash flow for them. So of course they're going to push it. They might find
Right.
other people who did what they did. They're like, actually, do you want to endorse this? I'll give you a cut. And so all of a sudden now all these people are coming out with these bodies that look similar or not similar to talk
Mhm.
about how this meal plan did all these things for them. And in reality, it's
Yeah, you were fresh off the surgery table
like,
like 2 weeks
like
ago. Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know about that. And it's so hard because you're sitting in your comfort zone, you're at home, you're scrolling and you're alone. There's no one else, there's no other voice there except for the one within yourself. And the one that's
Mhm.
attracted, the voice that's attracted to that might be that voice of like having to hear that weight stigma, right? Like I talked about how weight stigma, the stigma of weight is way more dangerous than the weight itself. And so
Right.
it really is just like this like self-worth, and it comes from a place of the patriarchy, right? Like
Mhm.
who deems what women are beautiful and what women aren't, right?
Right.
And like for the longest time, who was in power in just about every single place, every single like TV, magazines, all that media, like that's been historically a white male dominated place.
Right. Yeah, especially white men, and then like with white men kind of pushing onto white women kind of setting the like the standard, and like that's kind of like what everybody adheres to. And then I also kind of liked what you said about just as far as like people dang, I really just lost my thought.
It
But
happened.
I just think that overall it is like a hard society to live in because you don't know like what the best things for yourself. The only thing that you want to do is be able to fit in, and there all we know is that there's a certain body type that is like that's what seems to be like what's in. That's what I need to do to be able to look like this. So now I'm gonna go buy like this kind of phony diet plan or like phony like workout plan, this, that, and the third. And I had also wanted to mention I think I was going to say that, like, you have brought up like there's not like a lot of inspirational people that kind of like just want to like welcome you and celebrate you for like who you are, and like just be who you are, embrace yourself, and embrace your body image. Your self-esteem will like be so much higher if once you like really just start to accept yourself and not care about like what the standard is. And I feel like I do see those people. It just so happens that they fall so low in the algorithm, where the people that are like setting the standards and selling like the workout plans and everything are so like they're further up in the algorithm. So it's like every other ad, every other post you see is like, do this, do this, do this, do this. And like the motivational speaker, like, and maybe you'll see them like once or twice a week. And it's just like, it almost kind of makes me think, is this a conspiracy with social media? Because we know everything runs off money. Everything is capitalized within our society. So is this like a way to just kind of like push it to like make more money? Or are people like generally concerned about like actual health? Because like if it was a real thing, then I feel like, or if people were like actually genuinely concerned about health, then like they would bring more statistics into it. But no, like you see celebrities, you see the Instagram influencers, things like that, where people are like, oh, like do this, like if you want to like have the, like I maintain my shape with this. That's the main thing they say. They never talk about like battles with their actual physical health, like chronic things that might be ongoing for them. They only talk about like, if you want to look like me, have this shape, then do this, wear this waist trainer, use this sweat cream. It has nothing to do with actual health. So I don't know. I feel like it might be a conspiracy.
Yeah, and you know, I'm sorry if it translated into I don't think that they're there. They're definitely there. I just think, like you said, like the algorithm is choosing, it's still choosing the narrative diet culture. It's still
Right.
choosing the narrative. And we have to think about like those are that this is like when we think about everything we've talked about, we would need a pretty large disruptor to really make those concrete changes. And it's starting to happen. And so that means every single advocate, every single body, neutrality, body liberation activists, dietitian, therapists who works in this field, like we're all slowly chipping away. We're all working, right? But, you know, since it's not run by money, you know, the marketing may not look the same. You know, we're not going to pay millions of dollars to Instagram to run ads, right? Because that's what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's if you have a lot of money, you can do very well on Instagram. They will push your narrative because you're paying them to. And
Right.
same thing with Facebook and any other social media site that does any kind of advertising. And
Mm-hmm.
advertising has become so predatory. Like you can select like what race of people within what age who watch what show to be getting this content. So it's not even just like by chance that you're getting the content.
Right. They're praying. And then you might click on or visit like maybe one website off of Instagram, and you will be seeing the same kind of content for the next week and a half. Like, oh, like just because you click this link one time, now every other ad that when you're scrolling through your stories, I'm gonna make sure that you see this, and it's gonna be embedded in your mind. Even if you get off of Instagram and you mosey on over to TikTok, you're gonna see this on TikTok too. And you might get an email, you might go on Google, and that might be the first thing that's there, like when you see it. So it's like overall, of course, the internet like plays a very big part in like influencing especially the things that you see. And they do a very good job with like flooding you with that kind of information, so that way it sticks with you. Because it's a business. They're trying to make money. I really wanted, before we go, I really wanted to touch on Black men and eating disorders and binge eating or emotional eating or, you know, body image, because I feel like that's also like super taboo. And then when I was also doing research about it, I did not find as much as I did about women. They either, like, whenever I did the research, they either talked about Black people in general, or there were a lot of studies obviously done on Black women, because I feel like we are a little bit more sensitive about our body image. But there was not a lot of information done or a lot of research done about Black men. So what, like, do you have Black men clients? Like, what do you think about like Black men, and like, as far as it pertains to like this topic?
Yeah, so Black men absolutely are susceptible to eating disorders. I want to say that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I have had Black clients. I have had personal interactions with Black men who have eating disorders. I think it goes back to a lot of the barriers that Black men face that are kind of still being broken down right now, with that taboo of mental health at all being a topic of conversation.
Mhm.
However, it all is linked back to the same thing, which is like a lack of self-assurity and the wanting to belong. I loved when you said that, because and also the wanting to not have that stigma, right? Like
Mhm.
people who navigate in larger bodies, right? Like they go through different stigma. And like if I think about it, like going through the world as a Black woman, I'm going through a certain stigma, right? Like,
Mhm.
and sometimes I wonder, like, if I could just have if I could have no stigma for like 2 days, what would that do psychologically? How would that feel?
Right.
Um, and so sometimes, the pressure that Black men are under is excruciating, from being, if depending on whatever type of traditional family structure they're a part of, to
Mhm.
being a Black man in America, which we know with the police, which we know with different types of like organizational structures. It's just so much pressure. And sometimes I think about this. I'm like, sometimes we have to deal with the emergencies and put out those fires before we can get to the point where we can start thinking about ourselves.
Right.
And so, yeah, I've definitely had Black clients with eating disorders, Black men with eating disorders, and it is there. And it's as harmful as any other eating disorder.
Mhm. I will say, within like my own personal experience, because that's all I really have. I'm not an expert in this field by any means, so I could really only just talk off of like what I've experienced kind of growing up, like within this like day and age in this society. I feel like there's like either one side or the other. I've seen Black men that have just completely just accepted, like they are a little bit more accepting of kind of like the way that they are. So that's on one hand. They're more accepting of like their body image, like if they're shapely, if they're fit, maybe if they're skinny, like whatever the case is, they almost kind of see it as like a fixed thing. Like I can't do if they're like short, some men might feel like a little bit insecure about like their height. That might be, to me, that's what I've experienced, like to the extent of like insecurity. It's like, dang, like I wish I was like taller. Um, but to them it's kind of like a fixed thing. Like I can't do much about like me being 5'7". I can't be 6'3" tomorrow. Like it's not gonna happen. And I've also, on the other hand, I've also seen men that are unhappy like with their body image, and they do things, they do try to engage in like these ads and like the algorithms of like constantly kind of like flooding them with like, oh, in order to do this, like, you need to take more testosterone, you gotta up your protein intake, like you gotta hit the gym, do this, that, and the third, take all these different supplements and vitamins and things like that. So I haven't seen eating disorders, which is why I was actually particularly interested about that, because it's like I can't say it doesn't exist because I've never seen it, but I would definitely be more interested in knowing kind of like what eating disorders look like in Black men and how they kind of deal with that. But I've seen both ends of the stick, kind of, as far as like men accepting, like, dang, like if I'm not overweight, but like if I'm shapely, that's just what it is. I like to eat, like that's just kind of me. Or like if they want to like lose the weight and like be fit, or like have like this certain, like be lean and things like that, be muscular, they definitely are a little bit more motivated to be in the gym and be very, very consistent about it, and like kind of transform their bodies into like something that wasn't their body image before. Um, but like I think like, because we'll probably be ending here, I think that the overall message that I would like to convey to the viewers is just don't beat yourself up about like your body image. You just because I can't really speak on like food insecurity and things like that, because that is for bigger organizations to kind of like come together to figure out, as far, and like even us like as a community, we can work together to provide um better resources of food to allocate to communities that are in need. But I will speak on body image, just as far as I would wish that people would feel more secure about themselves and not feel the need to or feel the pressure to conform to what society says, because these trends always change. Within 5-10 years now, the standard might be you have to be petite and you have to be 5'5" or shorter. Me, I'm 5'9". That's not going to change unless like I chop part of my legs off and become 4 inches shorter. So it's just like, I would like to create an environment where it's like, come as you are very accepted, you are loved, you're beautiful just the way that you are. What would your closing message be to our viewers?
Yeah, I think it echoes a lot of what you just said. I also think it comes down to, when engaging with disordered eating, or when there is an eating disorder present, you lose a large part of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You lose a large part of yourself and the respect that you have for yourself and the ability to love yourself. And so then, when I think about it, I'm like, because your body is better than nobody. Right? Like,
Yeah.
because your body is better than nobody. And because bodies are there are earth suits, right? They allow us to go on journeys, achieve goals, dance in the rain, love, say funny things, give hugs, emote, and fighting against your body is always a losing battle because it's not going to leave you. It's there. And so like I understand that sounds nice and great, and
Right.
and like, realistically it's easier said than done, but the investment to reject who you are, at some point you realize, you look around and you're like, I spent so many years of my life not appreciating the body I have. And what did that do? How many engagements did I not go to out of shame? How many life moments did I skip because I didn't feel I was worthy? How many people did I not experience in my life as a friend or whoever because I felt like I couldn't? And all of the things that make a life worth living.
Right.
What happened to those? And so I think that's like my ending statement, right? Like, we all have, and I want everyone to know, like, we're up against something. That pressure is real. That weight stigma is real. That the comments and the judgments and the perceivements are real, and it's hard. But once you get to the point where like all of that becomes less important, you get to figure out who you truly are. And I guess that goes back into that authenticity coach moment for Brie.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how I see things in that way. I would like to say, if anyone has felt aligned with the message of today, you absolutely can visit my website, which is eatforsuccess.com. And there you can look into any sort of eating disorder or disordered eating services, as well as the authentic coaching, which is also there as well. And so, yeah, just the first step is really thinking about, like, what do I want out of my life? Do I want a full life, or do I want a life conforming to society, even though that makes me less of who I am?
Yep. I think definitely that just kind of the first step is honestly just sitting back and reflecting and answering probably difficult questions of what you want and like what would make you happy, and seeing if does that align with what society wants, because like you are living your life, society isn't living your life, society isn't living in your body. So I feel like the more that you accept yourself truly for who you are, the happier that you will be. So with that being said, I want to thank anybody that had tuned in today to watched today's episode of Black Mental Health Matters. Thank you so much, Brianne, for being our special guest today. Like she said, please visit her website. It can start with this finding services, connecting with people, just starting that conversation. You'll never know how far you can get unless you take that first step. So please visit www.eatforsuccess. eatforsuccess.com. Too many S's. And thank you, everybody. And we will see you next week on another episode of Black Mental Health Matters. Bye.